Hello and welcome to another Digital Photo Mentor live stream, how to edit photos. In today's live stream, I'm going to be working with several images submitted by subscribers, either here on YouTube or to my email list. If you are new to this channel, I do this every week at this time. And if you would like to submit your images, follow along today and see how it goes. And then you can submit your images for next week. You can use the link in the description below to do so. So I would like to pop into the chat here because we have lots of regulars that show up every week, and I like to acknowledge them for being loyal. Good morning, Linton. It's morning in Adelaide. Nice day there. Awesome. We've got some rain finally here to clear up some of our forest fires, so less smoky as we head into fall. Nice to see you as always, Linton. Nigel, I know you asked me about some question by email. You wanted me to show you the white balance eyedropper in Luminar. So I will remember to do that. So if you are, I'm glad you are here because you've already reminded me to do that just by being here. So welcome. Catherine from Texas. Love Texas. Which part of Texas are you from, Catherine? Holly from New Jersey. And I don't have any of your images today, Holly. We've worked on a lot of your images. So today we're going to be working with some different images. I'm going to get these up on the screen here. If you joined us last week, before I start that, let me just again say welcome to everybody, and please give this video a thumbs up and to subscribe to the channel. Especially if you're new here, because then you will get notice of all these new videos that we're posting. We try and post something new every week. So I'm going to get started here. Let me just hop over to Lightroom. Okay, there. I remember to play the little video intro. I always forget. All right. So, Kathy, north of Houston. Awesome. We spent a bit of time over on Portland, Corpus Christi on the Portland side when we did our RV trip. Canuck Don, where's Canuck Don? Oh, there he is. Awesome. Another from Australia. Good day. Alaska. Okay, we got a lot of repeats, and Diane from New Zealand as well. So awesome. So we've got lots of people from down under. Thank you for joining and spending the morning with us. So if you were here last week, or if you watched the video from last week, you may recognize these two images because they were submitted by Albert, and I had asked everybody which one they thought I was going to edit. Now, Rob, you might have to go do some recon for me. Check the chat on that last one to see what the overall guess was. But the answer and what I'm going to do on this one is I'm actually going to crop them both and then decide, because there's pros and cons of each one. So let me just dig in here, and you'll see me looking over this way because my other monitor is over here. So I am working with Lightroom for this image, and I'm going to be using some Lightroom today and some Luminar, because some of the people who've submitted images, I know that they are working with Luminar, so I'd like to demonstrate that for them. Okay, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the new Luminar NEO. If you have any questions about that, I can answer some of those for you today as well while you've got me here. All right. Rob says he's not doing the recon. Okay, so what I'm going to start with on this one is a crop. So the first thing I want to decide when I'm editing an image is, what do I want people to look at? What is the focus, right? If you've watched previously, you'll know my little upside down trick, which is look at the image upside down, because when you do that, it gives you an idea of where your eyes are naturally going to go based on highlights, okay, and brightness. And where my eye goes here is to the sky and then to this rock. Okay, so I know I'm going to have to do some tone control if I want the eye to go down to this little village down here, which is what I suspect he was taking a photo of in the first place. Okay, if I look at the landscape or horizontal image, the one that's taken the other way, right, I think this one actually shows the town better. And what I don't like about this image that I would probably crop out is this space over here. So when you're dealing with things in the background that draw your attention, I talk about this one a lot. So you probably get sick of hearing these things if you're a regular on the live stream. And it's brightness, sharpness, color, and contrast. Okay, so I'll leave those scrolling down the bottom for you so you can take notes if you want. So in this image, the brightest area is the sky, then that flat rock, and the areas of greatest contrast is also the sky because it has dark leaves and dark trees against the bright sky. Okay, so this area over here is what I would call like an orphan. Okay, so if I leave that area in, it's competing with the bright areas in the middle. And you generally don't want bright areas on the corner of your image because it draws your eye away from the subject. Okay, so what I would do here is crop that out, and I'm just going to crop freeform here. So I'm going to crop in to get rid of that bright spot, and there's nothing over there that really says that needs to be in the picture. Okay. Now when I'm looking at it, I can see now that this town is right smack in the middle of the picture. So if it is the subject, I'm not using the rule of thirds very much. So with the rule of thirds, you can see the grid on my screen. You want to put your subject off center. Okay, so you want to keep it a little more interesting than dead center in the middle. Okay, so I could do a few things to solve that and also solve the problem of the bright sky. So I could bring this top part down a bit because I don't really need to see a whole lot of the sky, if any, right? I could go actually all the way and let's see what that looks like, right? Because this is going to be a very different image than what we started with, right? Now the brightest area is this rock here, and I can deal with that with a radial filter inside of Lightroom, right? Let's take a look at this one. If I decide to crop this one, the sky is the same problem, but I don't think I'm going to crop it all the way out this time. So let's just see what happens if I come down to about there. Okay. So now that sky is not taking as much attention, okay, we still got the rock, but let's look at the two side by side again. Okay. Now I have sort of a bit more of this rocky cliff on the left showing on this one, less sky, and a little bit more sort of the bottom, and it shows how deep this crevice is with a little bit of sky, right? Tell me in the chat right now, is there one of these two images? Let me get this off the bottom here. Which one do you prefer? Okay, which one grabs you more? I'll just go full screen here so you can see them. Which one grabs you more, right? Do you like the one on the left that has the little bit of sky and seeing more down into the crevice? So looking down, to me, it feels like it's higher because it gives me the illusion of height on the sky and depth down into the valley, looking down the crevice, right? The one on the right, with the sky cropped off, and maybe we could leave a little bit of the sky, it gives you more of the valley. It feels darker and moodier, right? And I'm not sure I'm getting the same sort of depth as I am from the left one, right? Let's see. So Dawn says the left one. Rob says the left one. That's the direction I'm leaning as well. I thought I turned that off. There we go. That's the direction I'm leaning as well. Left one with some sky. Left one. Okay, so that seems to be the consensus, and I'm thinking that's generally the way I'm going to go here. So if I go back here, let's just see what this one looks like with a bit of sky. I'm not crazy about this one with a little bit of sky. I could leave a little bit more, right? I kind of need to leave something here in these leaves at the top, because otherwise it's just this stick and then your eye goes right out. But even when we compare the two, I still think your eye goes more. There's more interesting stuff going on in here, and this becomes a secondary subject almost. So you're competing these two things. Okay, let me come back on the screen here so you can see me. So I'm going to work on the vertical one. Okay. They're very similar, but this is actually a really great lesson for when you're doing the photography out in the field. Take both, right? If you're not sure and you come across a scene that's really beautiful, maybe there's beautiful light, take both vertical and horizontal. And even try different positions, like just different camera positions. If you are on the top of this hill, if you could get to that platform where, this rock is without danger, of course, go try that, or something over to the left or something over to the right. So try different viewpoints as well, right? So if you find a great scene, make sure that you work it. I believe I've already changed the camera profile here, and I've talked about this one before as well. If you're in Lightroom, it's at the very top. Now I'm using Lightroom Classic, the newest version, right? If you're not sure what version you're using, you just can go up here to About Lightroom. I'm using 10.4, which I believe is the most current version. I just updated it yesterday, actually. So make sure that you have the current version if you have the subscription model, and then you'll always have all the new bells and whistles, right? Under the camera profiles, Adobe comes with these ones here, Adobe Raw, and it comes the default with usually Adobe Color, right? So let's see if I go back to beginning. So it looks like Albert had already chosen one, and this is an RW, so I believe that's a Sony file, right? So it will know. Oh, Olympus. My bad. That's an Olympus file. I always get that one wrong. Okay, so that's an Olympus file. So then any profiles in here under the camera will be an Olympus profile. So we could look at standard, natural, portrait, or scenery. And I chose scenery because I thought it made the greens look nicer, but we could also try natural, brightens everything up a little bit. And look at this detail on this cliff here where it's dark. Just changing this camera profile from scenery to natural opens up the shadows a lot, right? So I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to go down into, just move this out of the road. I'm going to go down into the basic panel. I have a full video on using the Lightroom basic sliders. Maybe Rob can find the link to that one for everybody if you want to watch that. I'm going to go a little bit faster than I would normally demonstrating everything. I have a cat trying to dig under my door. So I'm going to lift up the shadows. So when I'm doing things with the sliders, one thing you want to avoid is doing what I call over editing or making what I call neon puke. Right. So I see this a lot with people doing HDR where they crank up the shadows and they bring down the highlights and they end up with something that looks kind of like this. Okay. The problem with this is it doesn't look natural. You've lost all your highlights and your shadows so that your dark areas are almost the same tone as the midtones, right? And it's lost sort of all shape and dimension. So don't be afraid of shadows. Shadows are good. We have an article on the website if Rob wants to find that about how dramatic shadows can improve your images. I think it's called Dramatic Shadows, Rob. So be wary. I almost never increase my saturation slider, almost never. Okay, so I'm just going to undo this. Let's see what auto does. I don't use auto a lot under the tone section, but let's see what it does. Okay, so it's brightened it up a whole lot, and I'm not super crazy about how it's done. So not using auto. We can also work with the white balance. Excuse me. I'm going to go with daylight because that's going to replicate sunny the most closely. So I'm going to use daylight white balance. Excuse me. So you can see it's already warmed up quite a bit. And then lower the tint a little bit. Then I'm going to bring the shadows up, but not too far. Okay, I just want a subtle little bit of lift here. Excuse me. And bring the highlights down. Can you hear me? Can anybody hear me okay? Yes? Should be. Okay. So these are global adjustments. Whenever you do anything with the main sliders, it applies to the entire image. Okay. So I'm not going to go too far. You can hold your alt or option key down when you're doing these sliders, and it will give you an idea of whether or not things are clipping. So what I like to do is set my white point, which is by doing the white slider, go up until you get some clipping indicators, as you see on the screen, these little white bits, and then bring it back down to the left until they're gone. Okay, so really I'm not giving it a whole bunch of white. You can see this little building over here blowing out a little bit. I'm gonna give it a little bit more, about like that. You don't really want your highlights blown out. Now I'm going to do the same on the black slider, and I want to have a little bit of black clipping about like that. Okay, that's going to give you much more depth and dimension by having the darks and the lights in your image. And that's constantly tweaking the color. I'm not happy with it. Then I'm going to work on some local adjustments. Okay, I'm going to add an edge vignette, which is one of my Lightroom presets. This is one I use all the time. Rob, if you could share a link to our Lightroom presets, please. Then I'm going to use a graduated filter, which is this guy up here, right? And I use the M button on the keyboard for the shortcuts. Double click effect, and I'm going to darken, right? But you'll see what happens when I drag it down from the top. So I want to affect the sky, right? So I'm affecting the sky, but I don't want it to affect, I'm just going to do this so you can see what it's doing. I don't want it to affect the land, but you can see that it is. So if you go to the bottom here, I'm going to do a luminance range mask, turn this guy on, and this is the range from dark on the left to white on the right, just like your histogram. So I'm going to remove this effect from the darker areas. And as I bring it up, you can see that it's coming off the dark leaves and it's only applying to the bright sky. So when I turn this back on, okay, toggle that on and off, you can see what that's doing. Okay, now I can decide if I want to do contrast, highlights. I could even add some blue in the sky if I want to do that. I could also do dehaze, or let's see, we could even blur it out a little bit. So let's do a little bit of dehaze on the sky, and that makes a nice contrast. Okay. The next one I'm going to do is a radial filter. So just M to close it, and then Shift M is the radial filter's keyboard shortcut, or you can just click the little circle right here. Double click to reset. So always on the word effect, double click. And I'm just going to affect the highlights this time. So I know what I'm doing, and I'm going to put it on this rock. Okay. So I'm going to put it here and then move it into place, rotate a little bit. And then once I get it where I want it, then I can back it off. Okay. So I don't want to go too far. I want to darken it down. And let's actually go a little farther. I want to darken it down so that this rock is not grabbing too much attention. Okay. Once again, if I want it to not apply to some of the outer areas, I can remove it from the dark areas, or I can use a brush. Right. So you may think, okay, the adjustment brush is something that you can brush effects in. And I could have just used the adjustment brush here, but I've created a radial filter. And then inside the radial filter, there's a brush element where you can brush the effect in or out. Press O on your keyboard, shows the overlay. Okay. So this green area, whatever's glowing green right now, actually, I'm going to change it to red. So I'm just holding Shift down and clicking O. So now you can see wherever it's red is where this is applying. I'm going to use the brush, set to erase, and set to about 60% or so. And then I'm just going to go around the edge because I don't want it to apply to the land or the trees back here. Okay, so I'm trying to get some of the overspill that's happening like that. Okay, so see what that's doing. I can even remove a little bit of clarity and texture from it. I'm just taking the attention away from that bright rock. Okay. I could also do something similar with this highlight down here. So you can actually, I'm just going to open it again. Once you've applied one radial filter, you can duplicate it and move it around. So you have to highlight the little dot, which I did, right click, choose duplicate, and then just move it, and you can resize it and adjust the mask and so on. Okay, so it's still applying to only the bright areas. I'm going to take it even farther, so it only applies to the highlights. Okay, so I'm just toning down those highlights. See what that's doing. Okay, like so. So let's take a look at the before and after. And I think I'm just going to add a little more black, punch the clarity and the texture a little bit overall, and increase the exposure. So keep in mind when you're dealing with exposure, that applies to the middle of your image, okay? So the midtones. So what I want you to watch is right here on the histogram, which is the middle or gray, right? So black's on the left, white's on the right. The middle is gray, right? Watch what happens. I'm just going to reset the exposure slider. If I put my mouse on the histogram, you see you get this little arrow that goes back and forth. Okay? You can actually grab the tones and adjust the histogram or adjust the tones from here. But watch which slider moves, okay? So I'm going to grab the histogram in the middle, okay? Which slider is moving? Adjustment on the exposure, okay? So that's proof that the exposure slider adjusts the midtones, okay? If you want to adjust highlights, you go up here, right? So that's only affecting highlights, and you can see that slider moving. If I want to adjust shadows, you can see that slider moving, right? See how cool that is? And blacks is way over here, like so. Okay, and whites is way over here, like so. Oh, like that. So that's about what I would do with this image. I think it's a little bit too yellow now. I like the color. And I might add one more graduated filter just to darken this edge a little bit, because you want to keep your eye into the center of the image. And I might do one here as well. Okay, so all I'm doing with those is darkening those bottom two corners. If I increase the vignette more, which is down here under effects, okay? If I increase the vignette more, right, it increases all the corners all the way around, right? But I didn't want to go all the way around. I just wanted the bottom darkened. So I used two graduated filters, okay? So there's a little trick for you. All right, instead of doing one graduated filter from the bottom, I've done two so that they kind of do the corners like so. Okay. Any questions? How are we doing here? Phil. Wow, photo Phil from France. Philippe. Bienvenue. No, yes. Bienvenue is that French, Philippe? I'm mixing up my French and my Spanish. I do that in my head. Bienvenido is Spanish. So bienvenue. Welcome, Philippe. 2 a.m. Yes. And if you can hear scratching, that is the cat in the background. I can actually see a paw coming underneath the door. So any questions about what I've done with this image? Right now, if I want to apply this to the other one, I can simply copy it and paste it, or I can just, let me open the thumbnails here. I can just select the second one and choose sync. Actually, let me go back here. Oops. Let me go back here. Okay. If I go to the next one, you'll see a little thing here that says previous. Okay, so if I click it, all of the settings from the previous one are going to apply. So everything that I just did, including the cropping. Okay, but we don't want that. Okay, so I'm going to do copy on this one and do everything except crop. Okay, because I've already cropped the other one differently. I don't want to copy the crop. And then I'm going to do, this is just Command or Control V for paste, just like you would in Microsoft Word or anything like that. And now once I've done that, all I have to do is just open the individual sort of local adjustments that I did here and just tweak them a little bit. Okay, so I've got the two radial filters. It looks like he shot these really close together in the same spot, standing in the same spot, but slightly change the composition. So we can just alter those just like that and really quickly processed both images. Okay, so now let me get all this off the screen. Now, which one do we prefer? Do we prefer the left one or do we prefer the right one? I kind of like them both now. Honestly, this one comes down to preference, I think. Let me just put it full screen for you because I think both of these are a good image to begin with. And I think it's just personal preference here. Right. Thanks, Catherine. Thanks for watching. Hey, Hope, how are you? Thanks for correcting my French. I'll do some Spanish later. Is anybody here from Spanish speaking countries? We can do that. Okay, next, let's see what we got. So moving on to the next image. This one I'm just going to do quickly because Dawn submitted it and Dawn is here. And Dawn's question was about whether or not, let me just read his question here, knowing the difference between telling a story and making a snapshot. And so his question is this any good or is it just another snapshot? Well, I would say there's definitely some value here, Don. Maybe you could tell us where you photographed this. I was thinking that this is actually Alberta, but now that I know you're in Australia as well, I would say that this is going to be Australia. And if I zoom in, I'm guessing I'm going to see some different kinds of trees here than we have in Canada. So what I look at, and I'm just going to get off all this stuff off again. What I look at when I'm either creating an image or when I'm looking at one to edit it, like this one, is what is the subject? That's the first thing. Okay, so what is the subject? What is it that I want to highlight in this image to show people? And then I'm going to edit it based on that. So when we're looking at this image, okay, tell me in the chat, what is the subject? Okay, if Dawn is here, tell us what it is what grabbed your attention when you took this picture. For the rest of you, what's grabbing your attention here now? Okay. Is it the strip of trees? Is it the layers of light? Okay. Because what grabs my eye is that there's sort of dark light, dark light, dark light. And honestly, this one here, if I go into the develop module, oops, gotta get back to Lightroom. This one probably would have been better as a horizontal image, right? Because what's happening here, if I go into the crop tool, there's a third of the bottom of the image that's all grass. And there's really nothing there to keep my eye interested, right? The top third is sky. The middle third is sort of where your interest lies. So if we start cropping this, I would get rid of a lot of this, okay, or most of it. When you have a lot of foreground, unless there's something there that adds to the story, okay, like a flower or a dog or a person walking or something to grab the eye, when you have a lot of foreground, it feels like the subject is farther away. Okay, so we're going to crop this in. Now we have, roughly half and half. So our horizon's sort of somewhere in here, notwithstanding the mountain. Okay. So now you have to decide, is the sky more important than the land and the foreground? And in this case, I don't think the sky is all that important. The clouds are interesting, but we could have less of them, right? So now we've come down to an almost horizontal image, right? Big change from the first one, okay? 15 kilometers north of Melbourne, he says. Awesome. Okay, I've been to Melbourne, right? Okay, so that is, now that I've done that, then I'm going to look at all of the other things. Aha! Okay, so I see this is a Fuji file, right? So man after my own heart, right? So You've done this with Fuji X-T3, 16 to 80 mil lens. Very nice lens. I'm quite jealous on that one, Dawn. Aperture priority, f13. Okay, so I would actually comment on that as well and ask if you shot this on a tripod, because the shutter speed for this lens is it's really slow. And unless you shot this on a tripod, my guess is we're going to run into some sharpness issues, which kind of looks like what's happening here. Okay, so I'm assuming this is an IS lens. Yeah. Okay, so it's got image stabilization, but the minimum shutter speed that you can handhold a camera at is generally 1 over the focal length. Okay, so in this case, that's 76 or 80, right? So you want to have your shutter speed at least an 80th or 100th here. Rob, if you could share the article of blurring and freezing motion on the website, this talks about the minimum shutter speed that you want to use. Okay. Rested on a fence post. Okay, so probably you got some stability from that. But the biggest thing you could have done here, and I'm going to ask you, Dawn, is what could you have done to increase that shutter speed? Because when you're looking at your exposure, there's two things you could have adjusted to get the shutter speed to be much faster. So think about that while I'm working on this, and you tell me, right? So the rolling hills and the long shadows. So exactly, yeah, cropping the bottom and the top. So exactly what I just did. All right. So, and anybody else can answer that same question too. What could Don have done to increase his shutter speed here in terms of camera settings? Okay. So I'll just leave this on the screen so you can see it. Okay. So I'm going to change the camera profile. I find that with Fuji, the Velvia Vivid is often too vivid, especially when you have a scene that has high contrast like this. So I'll usually use the Astia or the Provia. Those are my favorite go-tos. So next I'm just going to check. We've got a couple of highlights clipping, and I'm just doing that Alt option and then click on the slider. So I'm not going to worry about these because looks like they're a sign reflecting something. I'm going to check for blacks and see how we don't have any blacks. But when I bring it down and I create some blacks, I'm going to give it a little bit of clarity as well. Look at the difference in contrast. Okay. I'm going to find a better white balance as well. It looks a little bit on the orange side or the red side. Let's try something about like that. Okay. So see how adding that black brings in that contrast. So that's why I don't touch saturation, because as soon as you want more saturation, go to the black slider. Okay, so we've got a couple of answers in here. Linton says you could open up the aperture and increase the ISO. 2 points, Linton. Bump the ISO. Holly, and yeah, Dawn says increase the ISO. So both of those things. But in this scene, you really don't need F11, because F11 is going to give you, or F13 is going to give you a lot of depth of field, and your subject is really kind of in the middle of the picture here. And you could have done just as well with F8 or so. Okay, so you could have opened the aperture and increased to ISO 2 or 400, as Linton said. Okay. So then I would bring the highlights down. Now we can bring them all the way down here. I would probably do, I'm going to do a basic vignette, but then I would probably do a graduated filter at the bottom here, because there's lots of light coming from the bottom. And let's just bring these highlights down a little bit and shadows up a little bit. So this is the contrasty area. Okay, so the sun is hitting here. I'm going to just bring the highlights down and the shadows up, and overall just darken it a little bit. And I'm also going to make this a little bit bluer. Okay, so the reason being is that what's happening is this top half of the image is very blue because it's in the shade and then the sky, and the bottom half is very yellow. So I can actually even out my color by adjusting this a little bit here, giving it a little bit less yellow and less magenta, right, to even out this bottom part. And I could do the same on the top, right, but go the opposite direction. Okay, so I'm going to give it a little bit of yellow and maybe magenta, not quite so much. So I don't want to brighten the shadows because remember we talked about shadows are your friend and we like that layering of the highlight and the shadow. So let's see what these graduated filters are doing. Okay, so see how it's making the sky more dramatic and really bringing your eye into the middle of that image, right? It's also correcting some of the color differences between the top and the bottom of the image. Right? I might even go a little bit less on the yellow still here, like so. Okay. So overall, controlling the contrast. I would also probably either use a adjustment brush. I can do that. And then just paint in. Let me turn this guy off. Okay, and you should be able to see my size of my brush here. So I'm just going to paint in, and you have to check to make sure what your flow is, right? So I always keep the flow. Okay. Flow and density, okay, are two different things. Let me do a demonstration for you on this. Okay. I'm going to turn the exposure all the way down. Okay. So if I have flow at 100 and density 100, I get a black line. Okay. If I have flow at like say 30%, right, I get a light line. But if I go over it again, right, 3 times or 4 times, eventually it's going to add up to 100. Okay. So I'm layering. So the flow is like layering your paint when you're painting. Okay. But the density means that eventually it's going to hit maximum this density. Okay. If I change my density to 50, which is where it was, and my flow to 100, anybody guess what's going to happen? If I paint now, okay, the maximum I can do is 50%. It won't go any darker. See that? Maximum I can do is 50% because my density is 50%, right? So I always paint with my density to 100 and then lower the flow. And the point of that was I want to just darken the highlights. Oops. Let's not do it that much. Just the highlights on these two buildings, okay? Oops. Grab the edge of that by accident. Okay, so just darkening the buildings and maybe even this one as well. Let's see if I can get that little street sign. This street sign, actually, I might just zoom in. See, it's hitting like a stop sign or something. You can use the clone tool. I don't use it a lot in Lightroom, but for stuff like this that's pretty straightforward, I can just draw over it and then position my place it's sourcing from. Okay, so it picks a source, position it so that I don't like that line there, so that it matches. Okay. Or I can even dial it down. If I want to leave the sign, I can just lower the opacity, right? And if I go all the way to 100, it gets rid of it. So I think it's valuable to just get rid of that sign because it's drawing my attention. Okay? There's something else up here that's drawing my attention, so I could do the same thing as well, just a really quick clone that out, and there we go. Okay, so sometimes I use the adjustment brush for little spots that are highlights, and sometimes I literally just clone something out. Okay? Rob does say this to me all the time. I see things that he does not see. And part of that is I've trained my eyes to see those things because I've been doing this for so long, right? So my eyes see things that you may not see because maybe you haven't been doing photography for 34 years like me. Right? So don't be discouraged if you don't see the things that I'm seeing. Just keep practicing, right? Make it your mission to pay attention to things, right? Even if you don't have a camera in your hands, pay attention to everything. I see things on the street, walking down or driving down the street that he doesn't see either, right? Or in movies, I'll back up and say, "Hey, did you see this thing?" And he didn't see it either. So pay attention to to little things everywhere, okay? So that's about what I would do with something like this image, Dawn. So I've used the graduated filters to even out the light on the top and the bottom, cropped it, and also adjusted the color, right? This might be an image that would look nice in black and white as well because you've got a lot of contrast. So when you have a lot of contrast and deep shadows and highlights, you can work with an image in black and white. And now that I've turned it into black and white, okay, I can actually increase this and the sky. Let's maybe not go down quite so far here. I want to give it more contrast in the sky. There we go. Let's try more blacks or dehaze. Okay, so see how I'm giving that contrast in the sky. Let's do more white, like so. Okay. And overall, I want to make sure that I have lots of contrast here also. Okay. Notice that after I brushed over those little buildings, I'm now increasing the whites overall too. Okay, so black and white gives it a very different look. I believe I have another video on doing black and white conversion. Actually, which one can we share with them, Rob? I think there's one in the 5-day challenge where I talk about black and white conversion. And when you do a black and white conversion, make sure that you leave it on the Adobe monochrome, right? Because when you go down to the black and white sliders on the black and white section, right, you still have the ability of adjusting the colors, right? For example, in here, I can adjust the tones of the greens and the yellows, okay? So I can actually give it more contrast just by adjusting the green and the yellow and by adjusting the blue, okay? So look what happens when I adjust the blue. Right? Now I'm thinking, this reminds me of something from Ansel Adams. If anybody's ever seen Moon over Hernandez, okay, so very, very, very striking image from Ansel Adams. I want everybody to Google that if you're not familiar with Ansel Adams' work. Famous landscape photographer, right? And it's Moon over Hernandez, but it's got the kind of lighting like this, right? I'm not crazy about this building over here on the left, Don, so you might want to even do something with that. And here's another trick with the cloning tool. If you use the cloning tool at a lower opacity, right? So for example, I'm just going to actually clone from the trees, which looks ridiculous, right? But if I change it to about 20%, right? You can see that it just starts to darken the building down to the point where it's gray, right? I'm going to feather it a little bit less, something like that. Okay, so see what it's doing? It's just toning that building down, okay, using the gray from the trees up here, something like that. Okay. So little tricks with the clone tool, but I like the black and white too. Okay. I'll show you one more trick in Lightroom because they have changed the split tonings tool. If you're using the current version of Lightroom, you'll see color grading now where it used to be split toning. Okay, so technically now it's a tritone because you have the ability to do 3 highlights, shadows, and the midtones, whereas before you could only do the highlights and the shadows. So now it's what's called a tritone. Okay, so if I want to just add a little bit of a sepia look to this, I'm going to dial in some yellow on the shadows and then increase it. Oops. All right. Increase the saturation by pulling up this little slider in the middle here towards the yellow. And you can see that I can get sort of a brown tone, right? Something like that. Or we can do a blue tone, right? Or you can do what's called a split tone, right? Where you've got warm shadows. And let's go for something blue-ish on the highlights. And I'm going to go to extreme just so that you can see it. Right? So now we've got what's called a split tone. Okay? Or we can reverse it. Blue shadows. I actually like split toning in this direction. Blue shadows and yellow highlights. And that's kind of cool. Actually, I've got a few presets like this on my Lightroom presets, but I'm not sure if they translate because they were made with the split toning tool. So interesting to know. You don't know which one to do for black and white conversion. We'll find it and put it in the description in the video below. Remind me later, Rob. We'll find that one. All right, time for some Luminar edits. So I hope that was helpful for you, Don. Is Trish with us today? We haven't seen Trish yet today. Usually she's here from New Zealand. Haven't seen Trish, but she often dials in. And I've got one of her images from India that she took when she was on tour with our tour leader, Daniel. And I know they went to this coal mine and they were photographing these coal miners. And I know that she works with Luminar. So I wanted to bring this one into Luminar. So you're talking about the landscape photo. Yeah, I think it makes a big difference, Catherine, and I really like the black and white choice. Okay, so I just decided last minute to try the black and white, and I think it really added a lot, and we can add more contrast. Because what was really the subject there was the play of light. Here, let me go back over there. Okay, what was really the subject here is that play of light between the darks and the lights, and that layers of the darks and lights, and the black and white really brought it out. All right, Dawn, now your job is to try and replicate that. Okay. So let's move on to Trish's image, and we're moving into Lightroom now, or Luminar now. Sorry. So this is Luminar AI. And for those of you that are using Luminar, there is the new version now, which was announced the other day. Okay, so if you have not seen it yet, let me just find the logo. Look in the upper right corner of my screen right now. Luminar NEO is the one that was announced by Skylum last week. And unfortunately, I was under an embargo, so I couldn't talk about it last week. I couldn't tell you, but now we can. And there's actually only a few early bird prices left on the pre-order. But if you have questions about Neo, Rob, could you please share the link? I wrote an email to my email subscribers, and he's going to pop that in the chat for you because I answered sort of a lot of the questions about Neo. Is it an upgrade from Luminar AI? No, it's not. It's a new product. Is it going to transfer the catalog? No, it won't. And it's a completely two different products. They will live side by side and exist. Oops, where am I? They will live side by side and coexist. So if you're familiar with Adobe's family of products, there's Lightroom and Photoshop, which are completely different and do different things. Then there's also Photoshop CC and Photoshop Elements. Okay, so if we want to think of it in terms of those things, Luminar AI is going to be more like Photoshop Elements. Okay, so it's more of a version for people that want to get in and out of their editing software as quickly as possible with as little effort and learning curve. So you're not spending all your time learning how to use the software so that you can get back out doing photography, but still get good results. Okay, Luminar NEO is going to be more for people that want to take it to the next level. So layers are back. So if you use Luminar 4, you'll be happy to know that layers are back in Luminar NEO. I haven't seen it function yet or how it works yet. I've just seen some screenshots. So if you want to see what it looks like, I've actually got a few here. Let me just do it real quick. So quick before and afters, you could do things like this is the original image. There's now a background changer. So you'll be able to change the background to a new image and it will mask the subject for you. You'll be able to do things like light up the subject, right? So if you've got a subject that's too dark, so not just portraits, right? They've got face light for portraits, and now there'll be a light for other things as well. There are layers so that you'll be able to do composite images and things like this. And also another thing that people are going to be really excited about is automatic dust removal. Can you see all the dust on this image? And the one-click dust removal. Okay. So lots of new things there. Actually, one that I was really excited about was this one, right? Automatic. If you've been to India or Asia anywhere, automatic power line removal. Okay, so that's AI. They've put into the technology to learn how to remove power lines. Don't ask me how it works, but apparently it does. Right. So again, this is all the things that I'm hearing that's coming. I haven't seen it in working yet, but my short answer is it's for you. If you liked Luminar 4 and you miss layers, I would say go with Luminar NEO. If you use it as a plugin for Lightroom and Photoshop, go with Luminar NEO because the catalog and the database isn't going to really matter so much. If you're already invested in your catalog in Luminar AI, that product will continue to be supported and developed. So don't worry about that. It's not getting pulled from the lineup. It will continue. So I would say continue with that. If you have any questions, please feel free to send me a message on our website. If you know my email, just email me directly or fill out a contact form on our site. If you could please put the contact form, Rob. Awesome. Thanks, Catherine. She says my email was very helpful in understanding it and how it might work for you. If you have Luminar AI, yes, you will get a discount. So you just need to use the discount loyalty link, which I'll send to you right here, Dawn. All right. You can also email me if you're not sure where to find that as well. So if you go there, or if you end up on this page, okay, so if you end, I'm on Canada, so I'm going to see that. If you end up on this page, you just have to click where it says validate your special price, and then it will give you the price for the discount if you already own the AI, if that helps, right? And as you can see, they're only selling 30,000 copies at these prices, and then the price is going to go up, and there's only 3,200 left, okay? So if you're on the fence about it and you're not sure, send me a message, ask in the chat here. I'll stick around and make sure that basically I just want you to get what's right for you. Okay. So if you have questions, tell me about your unique situation and I will tell you whether or not I honestly think you should have Luminar AI or NEO. Okay. I personally don't see a benefit in having both. I would get one or the other based on your individual needs. Right. I hope that helps. Okay, so now that we said all that, let me get into Trisha's image here. And what I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to go into some of my templates, okay? And I'm going to see, this is the workflow in AI, okay? And the big difference that between Luminar AI and NEO is they're saying there will not be template workflow, okay? So you go directly into the image with layers. So it's not going to be as intuitive and directive as AI. Okay, so if you like this part of the workflow, stick with AI. Okay, so it's suggesting some essence templates. I can just take a look and see what those look like. I know that there's one in my own templates that I created. Right, that's not bad, but it doesn't really, it's not super artistic. So with these guys, I'm looking for something that might be, you know, a little more grungy. Okay, so experimental. Now we're probably getting closer. Right, that's interesting. So that is like a film leak. If you remember shooting a film back in the day, so that's like a film leak. So these experimental ones might be kind of cool. Right, that's kind of neat. But I know that I've got one in my set of templates that I created. Okay, so this is one that a set of images or a set of templates that I made for Skylum. Okay, and if you have Luminar AI or older version, if you have templates that you've purchased for AI, they will get converted to Luminar NEO. Okay, so not to worry about that. All right, let me just undo this one. There we go. Okay, so that is my ghoulish grunge template. Now, how cool does that look on these guys? Right? So it makes them kind of bluish. They look kind of sad to me, so it's sort of fitting, right? And gives it this really grunge look. So that is literally one click out of the gate. Okay. When you apply a template, because I really like this one, you can then go through and tweak it. Okay, so I'm going to go in here and I'm just going to do a little bit of face light, right? Because what this will do is light up these guys' faces a bit. Right? I'm just going to go a little bit. And I'm going to go with brown eyes and give them some color in their eyes. Okay. Often in groups as well, you can use the enlarge eye slider in cases like this where they're squinty a little bit, because it actually will help open their eyes or make their eyes look a little bit more open. Okay, let's see how we're doing. Okay, so it looks like I've cropped it as well. My template must be cropping, so I'll check that. Let me go under composition here. No, I must be correcting. I'm correcting for distortion, I bet. Yep, optics. So I'm correcting for auto distortion on the lens. If I don't want that, it's actually not bad, right? I can just turn that off, right? So that's under the optics section here in Luminar. Now I know that Nigel asked me about the color picker, and I won't forget that one. Don't worry, I will come back to that. So I really like what's happening here. I think I'm going to make the vignette a little bit darker. And my trick, remember, is I turn the amount of the feather down to 0. And I'm going to make this a little more oval so that I can see the shape and the size and the position. Okay, so I'm using the feather at 0 to get this sort of oval positioned evenly around these guys, right? Like that. Then I put the feather back and the amount back. Like so. And I think the overall image is now a little too bright. So I lightened their faces, but I'm actually going to lower the exposure now. Okay. So that's another trick that I use the face light tool for, is I go into the portrait tools under face and I use the face light slider, right? And then I darken the image overall, okay? Because what that does is it literally adds a vignette to everything except their faces, right? See how that's working? So now they stand out. I've also added a bit of grain in that part of the template. So there's a film grain added, which adds to that grunge feeling. If we don't like the sky, we could change it, right? And what I think I want to do here is keep the sky fairly simple. I don't want to put bright clouds or anything, right? There's actually quite a few free sets of skies, and we have a sky set available as well. I believe we have a coupon code for that as well, Rob. So if you could please share our coupon code and a link to our sky pack, right? And now you can sort them. So my sky pack looks like this, right? And you get all these little thumbnails. Right? If you don't see this, make sure that your Luminar is up to date, right? If you're not sure, just go up here and check for updates, right? So I'm going to use one called California Clear Skies because I want to just put something in that looks like, you know, it should fit, right? Because it's kind of just a hazy, overcast day, and I want to add a little bit of color there without adding, you know, bright blue clouds or a crazy sunset. Let's try one that's not quite so colorful. And once I get it in there, then I can do some adjustments to refine it. But you can really see the grain. Okay, so that looks a little better. So the next thing I'm going to do is just position it and refine the masking a little bit here. It takes a second for it to get in there and show up. Do we have any questions about this so far? Did anybody have any questions about NEO? I answered Dawn's about the discount. And there's my horizon placement. I'm just going to move that down a little bit. Like so. And I'm just going to do, I find that fixed details closes that little sort of halo a little bit on things. Right. I'm not probably going to do scene lighting on here because this is going to take the color from the sky and put it on them. Didn't do quite a bad job. Let's see what happens if I do relight human. So it's taking the color from the new sky and putting it into the rest of the image so that they blend a little bit nicer, right? There's no reflection here. There's no water, so I don't have to worry about that. I think that's about all. Okay, so I could actually darken the sky just a little bit. Let's see what happens there. That works. All right, so now you can see what's happening. Let's do a full before and after. So I went with a really stylistic look for this image. And why I decided to do that, again, back to the, you know, what do I do to images and why, is this one, their faces are sort of dirty. We know that they're coal miners or work at the coal mine. So I wanted it to have that sort of dirty, grungy feel that really goes with the scene and what they do for a living, right? So that was my initial approach. And I knew that I had created a template, or if you have templates that you've purchased or put in your favorites, go there, right? Go there and try them, because sometimes it will give you an idea. So I already had an idea in mind of what I thought I wanted, and this one worked perfectly. If you don't have an idea in mind, sometimes templates can take you down a road that you didn't even think of, right? Holly has a great answer. Okay. I bought Neo just in case because it's only literally $34 US if you buy it now. Yes, you can start a new catalog in Neo and use them both. Right. So, and honestly, if you have both and you have most of your images or all of them in Luminar AI, and you find that you need to do an advanced editing on one, I'm not sure what the cross will be, if you'll be able to take it from AI to Luminar as a plugin to Neo. They haven't said yet. So that's, again, something that may come down the line. But you could actually just finish the image to the point where you like it in Luminar AI, export it as a full-size file, and then go work on it in Neo in the advanced mode, okay? And just do the ones that you want that way. So yeah, for 30, like you said, for $34, what do you got to lose, right? And there's a 30-day money back guarantee once it's delivered to you. So once you have it, if you don't like it, just ask for your money back. No harm, no foul, right? So what does everybody think about this image? I'm quite happy with the way that turned out, right? So I hope Trish likes it. I hope she watches later. She's not here today, but I will send her a message and let her know that I worked on her minors today, because I think that's a fantastic image, right? Their eyes say everything, the eyes are the windows to the soul. And because I changed their eye color, and that's another little trick that I do in the portrait section here, is I change the iris to brown, right? Because their original eye color is dark brown, okay? But when I leave it as original, I'm just going to zoom in so you can see. Let's see this guy here, for example, okay? When I have it on original, I'll just take a moment to sharpen, right? You could see that their eyes are really dark, like almost bordering on charcoal or black, okay? Still waiting for it to load that image. There we go. Okay, so see how dark his eyes are? When I change it to brown, right, watch what happens. And I can adjust if I decide that this is too much brown, right? That's popping a little bit too much. I can just dial it down. Okay? But I still get that color in his eyes, okay? Well, like so. Maybe bring it down a little bit more. And this is actually another good lesson, because I didn't look at this image full size, right? Full at 100%. And the eyes looked okay zoomed out. But once I zoomed in, I could see that the eyes were too much and they didn't look real, right? So do look at things closer up as well. Very punny, Holly. Very punny. She says it's cool. I mean, cool. Okay. Hey, Hope. Nice to see you. Thanks for dropping in. All right. So let's go back here, because I've got another portrait image that I want to work on. Another couple of them, actually. And this one here is, again, another candidate for templates. Okay, so Dawn's question earlier was, is it a snapshot or is it a piece of art? Okay, so for me, this is a bit more of a snapshot, but there's some lovely things going on here. Like she's got actually really beautiful light. Okay, I would have liked to see her looking at the camera and maybe her eyes opened a little bit more, but let's see what happens. I've got some of my templates here as well. Okay, and these are some that are built into when you buy my template set on Skylum. Okay, so I've got one called Hollywood Heyday, which makes it sort of this really 40s black and white look. So look at that. Look at how her skin is glowing, right? Isn't that amazing? One click. That's my template. I've got another one. I'm not going to do grunge on her, because that would be mean. She doesn't need to look like a coal miner. Okay, I don't like that look for her. This one is just called Low Key Portrait. Okay, so Low Key Portrait is another template that I made to go with all dark tones. Okay, so you can see how it's really toning down her white blouse, which is nice. but I tried a couple of others on here that I've created sort of as a sub template. So I took my Antique Touch template, which adds a sepia tone but almost faded look to the image. And I played around with the new Portrait Bokeh in the background. Okay, so how cool is that? Okay, so it looks like an old photo, right? And I also played with one on the Glamour one that I just did a moment ago. Okay, so Glamour Glow adds a lot of skin softening and things like that. And what I did on this one is I'm going to show you, I added the Portrait Bokeh. Okay, I might warm her up a little bit because she looks a little bit cool with this template. So, this is a perfect example. Okay, so Nigel, are you paying attention? Nigel, he wanted to know how to use the eyedropper for white balance in Luminar AI. So here we go. Okay, so this eyedropper here. So with the white balance, because this is a JPEG, it's not giving me any of the normal options. Normally you would see pull downs of the different white balances, okay? Because it's a JPEG, I'm not getting that. But we do have this little eyedropper. Okay, so when I click the eyedropper, right, oops, and I go over the image, okay, you can see it says pick a target neutral. Okay, so I want to pick something that I know that's white or black. So I'm going to try her blouse and see what happens. So if I click on that, what happens is whatever I clicked on, the program is going to neutralize. Okay, so you can see that what it did was it added 8 yellow and -3 magenta. Okay, so it did warm up the image. And I like it warmer, but it's gone maybe just a touch too far because probably her blouse is not pure white. It's got a little bit of blue in it. So I'm just going to dial it back a little. But it got really close. Okay, so that's how to use it, Nigel. I could try again and pick a different spot, like maybe down here instead, and see if I get a better result. Right? That one gave me even warmer. Okay, so I like the way I had it. I find that the eyedropper will get you close if you have something that is neutral in your scene. If you are doing a portrait, for example, get something like this. Right? These are just like, it comes on a little lanyard. It's in one of our Amazon lists, I believe, Rob, under portraits. Get something like this. So it's got a gray card, a white card, and a black card. And if you take a picture of the person holding this like this, right? Specifically, the gray card is what you want, actually, right? If you just take a picture of this and then use your eyedropper and click on the gray card in the picture. So imagine she's got the gray card in front of her like this. So the first picture, take a picture like this of them holding it, right? Then you can use the eyedropper to get neutral. But I find that yes, the camera will not focus on me. I don't know why. Right? I find that neutral makes skin tones a little bit cool. So that's why I usually like to warm it up a bit. So I'll use the eyedropper and then warm it up a little bit. But the fun I wanted to show you here is under the portrait section. Okay. So inside my template, it's got the face light again. So it's that same trick that I showed you with the minors. So lighting her face, darken everything else. Right? I've got an edge vignette around the whole image. I've changed her eyes to brown. And notice how I've done enlarge eyes to 56. Okay. Let me just do a before and after because she's kind of got her eyes partially closed. Again, this is a trick that, look at her eyes. Okay. When you do the enlarge eyes, right, it looks like her eyes are more open. Okay. So it's doing all kinds of things here, right? We've got, I don't think she's got dark circles, so I probably don't need that one so much. She doesn't have a red eye, maybe a little bit. Okay. All of these things look like good settings. Let's check mouth. We're whitening her teeth. Make sure you don't go overboard with teeth, right? Because you can go too crazy. You don't want people to look like they're glowing in the dark. Same thing with eyes. I do find that Luminar sliders under the portrait area, if you go all the way, you might go too far, but I actually find that they're not bad, right? So you can go fairly high. Just be wary of making people look like their eyes are glowing in the dark or their teeth, right? Under the skin, I've done skin smoothing to the amount of 65 and the shine removal. If I turn these off, you can see what it does. Let me just zoom in to, let's say, 50% here. Okay, so let her draw. All right. Give it a second. Okay, so that is with the skin smoothing off. And I know I tried doing the skin defects as well because she's got like some sort of small bumps around her skin. And what happened was when I turned it on, it actually removed some of the dots on her blouse. So I turned it off, but let's see what skin smoothing does. Okay, so just that skin smoothing to 65 and the shine removal, look what that does, right? Does an amazing job. If I turn on the skin defects removal AI, it's looking for blemishes, right? And it got a few of them, but it also picked some things up in her blouse. So I wasn't crazy about that. I'm going to leave that one off, right? If I want to just get these little blemishes, I would just go in here with then erase tool real quick, right? Let me back out. Right. Under body, I did shape a little bit because often if somebody is really wide or looks larger in the picture, the body will actually help them look a little slimmer. I don't think it's doing much in this particular case, and we don't see her abdomen. Okay. Keep in mind that the more AI things that you turn on, if you have trouble with the software slowing down, if you don't need some of those AI things, turn them off, right? Like in the one where I replaced the sky on the miners, I turned the reflection slider off because I wasn't using it. There was no reflection, right? So the more AI you have actively running, the longer things may take. Okay. Okay, now I'm going to go into the last one, which is the Portrait Bokeh. So this one was not part of my templates, but because they added this feature after I created them, I may be updating them to include it. So what I did was when you first hit this slider, it starts at 0, it does an automatic mask of the subject. So when I move my mouse over, you can see that it's cut her out, okay? So it knows where the background is, and it did a really good job even around her hair. Okay, you see that? So even if it didn't, you actually have an option of adjusting things. Okay, so for example, if I wanted to, let's just pretend I want to defocus her hair. Okay, we don't, but let's just see what happens. Okay, so now you can see that the back part of her hair is now part that's out of focus. Okay, if I made a mistake, I just hit restore and it will go back and find the original mask. Okay. Or you can do defocus and focus. Right. I did a full video on using the Portrait Bokeh AI tool, so I'm not going to go over each individual slider here. Rob, if you can share a link to that one, because it's an amazing tool, and I just want to show you a little bit of what I have done. So I've increased the amount of the blur quite high to 93. Depth correction, I went all the way to 0, so that basically when I go the smaller the number, the further to the left I go with the slider, the closer the blur gets to the subject. Okay. And because the wall is sort of away from her, if I go depth correction like 0 where it started, you don't get as much blur on the background. Okay. So you get more blur the closer you bring it to the subject, if that makes sense. Okay. You have to be careful if their feet are in it though, because you'll end up with a subject that's floating. So you have to watch out for that one. I lowered the color to the warm, the cool side because the wall was very yellow and it draws attention from her. It was competing with her skin tone. Because your eye goes to warm colors and they project, if the wall is less yellow, she will stand out more, okay? Because her skin tone is warmer than the wall then, okay? I'll take it farther just so that you can see how that's changing the color of the wall from yellow to blue, right? And it's not going fully blue, it's going more neutral, which I actually don't mind, right? Because then the color is not drawing away from her, right? Highlight glow will do things like if you've got little lights in the background, it'll give you a bit of bokeh kind of look, right? I could also go the other way and brighten the background. I chose to darken it, right? You could also go the other way and try and brighten it and see what happens. Okay, so now we've got more of a high key image, but I find then that the plant that's kind of sticking out of her head stands out too much. So I like the way I had it with darkening, right? So let's look at the before and after. So before, Okay, so looks like somebody's sitting in their kitchen, maybe some nice light coming in from the window or something, right? Pay attention to stuff in the background, right? If you have ordered Neo, changing that background may be an option as well. And you can see what a great job that the software does in cutting out the subject. And I anticipate nothing less or in Neo as well. So I expect it to be really good at cutting out subjects, right? So we could actually put her on like a portrait background or something completely different, right? Any questions about the portraits? So I've got another one, and I'm going to do one last portrait, and I think I'll save our little canoer for next week. Any questions? How's everybody doing? Okay, now this image is from Aj. I hope I hope I'm saying your name right. I believe you are in California. Let me see. Where are you from? United States. Okay, so the question here was, I took this image for my son's senior portrait. I have little to no experience with portrait photography and Lightroom development of portraits. I mostly do sports. Any suggestions or comments would be greatly appreciated. 2 questions. How to best process skin tones and the background. Well, guess what? We just did that, right? So let's see what happens if I use that same exact template. Now I'm going to probably have to adjust it here because I use the glamour template. There's a lot of glow and skin stuff. On a man, you wouldn't necessarily want as much glowing. Okay, so I'm going to try this template and see what happens. So it should automatically mask him again. And because I have the background set to blur and add blue and darken, okay, see what it's done. Now in this case, it's actually done a really good job of the Portrait Bokeh because this background should be a bit bluer. So I'm actually going to make it even bluer, maybe not quite so much depth, and maybe not quite so much blur. So I could actually turn the blur almost all the way down and have almost no blur and just use these sliders here to adjust the brightness and the color of the background. Okay, so this Portrait Bokeh AI has multiple uses. Okay, so I don't have to blur it quite so much. Now you can see what's happening with the body AI. Okay, so this template does have body AI, and you can see that it's made him a little bit tucked or slimmer, right? And actually, I would probably do a little bit on this. Doing body and shaping things is very much an ethics question. Okay, I tend to not do this kind of thing and make people look unrealistic and like sticks, especially conscious of doing so with young girls, young women, because body image and poor body image is a real problem. So I don't want to get carried away, right? But sometimes, just like on here, maybe his posture's not good or his shirt is kind of puffy. It can just minimize it and keep it subtle. So I'm just going to keep that at like a 10 or 11. And let's see what happens on this one if we do abdomen. Okay. So it tries to find the midsection and tuck a little bit. Okay. Now I'm getting, I don't know if you can see this on your screen. Can you see his shirt? It looks like it's got all this weird sort of ziggy-zaggy pattern all over the place, right? If you've ever seen that occur, that's what's called moire pattern, okay? So you can see that his shirt has little tiny pinstripes on it. And often when you look at it sort of zoomed out and viewed full on the screen, your screen just can't resolve those tiny stripes when it's zoomed out like that. Okay, the pixels can't resolve it. So if you see something like that, it may or may not print like that. Okay, so make sure you zoom in to 100% because now I don't see it even at 50% and it should be fine. Okay, but there are things to remove moire if you are getting a moire pattern. Okay. So let's go back over here. Right now, we did a lot of skin smoothing on the other lady. And like I said, for a guy, it's a little too much skin smoothing. Okay. He's a young fellow because he's doing his senior's portrait. So I'm assuming 18 or so. But I'm going to dial the skin smoothing, which is the amount, down to somewhere around 24, 25. Okay. I don't see that he has any skin defects, so I won't even touch that one. But I am going to go back to face and adjust the eyes because, as you can see, he's got blue eyes and I've given him brown eyes. So I'm going to try blue. And you can see that. I don't know if you can see that. Let me zoom in more. I find that the blue goes a little like crazy blue, right? It's a little over the top. So I could dial down the, sliders a little bit and bring those down and see if that helps. But I also will try gray, right, as a color. So that's better. But let's see what gray looks like. I find that the gray actually works pretty well on blue-eyed people, right? And I've got his eyes enlarged too much. We're going to scale that back down. I don't think he needs his eyes enlarged. He's starting to look too cartoony, right? I only use the eye enlargement thing when people are a little bit on the squinty side, just to open their eyes up a little bit. Still opening them a little too much here. And I think his teeth are a little overly white. And I don't want to give him lipstick, right? Because that was, again, a lady thing. So we don't want him to have lipstick. Turn that down. That looks better. Okay, so now you can see he's looking more sort of masculine, manly. We still have a little bit of texture in his skin, right? If I want to go back and see about blemishes, let's see what kind of job that does. It's literally a one tick checkbox. And if you have somebody that has lots of blemishes, try it, right? If they've got moles or things, let's see if it gives me an example here. I don't see that it's removing anything. If, for example, it removed something on his face like a mole, you can actually just mask it and put it back, right? I've had some odd ones where it actually removed their nostril and I thought it was a blemish, and I just used the mask to put it back. Right? He's got a little bit of dark circles under his eyes, so that quite high is a good thing. Right? He could have used a little more light in his eyes. So when you're photographing something like this, ideally you want to be using a reflector or a flash or something to add light into the face. Right? Is there a way to add a catch light to the eye? Linton wants to know. That's a really good question. There is a catch light there, and I have an idea on how to do that. So yes, good question. Bear with me. Ellie, awesome. I'm glad these tutorials are helping you. And that's why I demonstrate Luminar AI a lot, because that's the one that I recommend as a software for beginners, right? I had to look at your profile picture again because I thought it was a little sea turtle because it looked like something on the beach, but I think it's a leaf or a shell. Okay, so I'm also slimming his face, and I think I'm going to turn that all the way down as well. He doesn't need slimming really, so I don't want to make him not look like himself, right? I might bring the brightness of his eyes up a little bit, and that's going to help with the catch light a tiny bit, right? But the face light, I'm going to bring up quite a bit more. So let's see what happens if I bring his face light up more. He should get brighter here. And I'm going to double check my vignette, right? Because when I do these, I always add a vignette. And I've also added a soft focus filter under glow. Okay, so if you've used to use the Orton effect, or you're used to Luminar 4 and you're looking for Orton effect, it's now under glow. But I've added a soft focus, and I'm just going to see what that does without. So for a guy, again, I don't think I would use the soft focus. Or if I do, I'll change it to Orton effect and just make it really, really minimal. And so I just want ever so slightly. And this is a trick going back to when I was shooting film in medium format. I actually used to have a filter that went on the front of my lens to soften things. So you get the biggest, most expensive camera you can, and then put a filter on to blur things, right? But the reason is that the cameras that we have now, especially digital ones with such high resolution, some of the Sony A7s and so on, have such a high resolution that when you photograph somebody, you can see every pore, and that's just not flattering, right? So I'll usually add a little bit of glow for guys, but not too much, right? I am going to go into the composition tool for a couple of reasons, because in case you haven't noticed, the horizon is crooked. Okay, so I'm going to do the composition AI just by clicking the purple button, and then I'm just going to click this one, which says straighten perspective. Okay, now you can see that the horizon is a little straighter. I'm going to go even a little more. Okay, and I'm going to crop in a little more as well, because I find that there's a lot of sky above him that I really don't need. Okay, I kind of might even put him off center like this and give some space in front of him. So when I'm doing a portrait, I want the head to sort of be at the third, or the eyes to sort of be, let me open the composition tool again for you. I want the eyes to sort of be on that third line. Okay, so if we're talking about our rule of thirds and you're dividing the image, with your tic-tac-toe grid of thirds, right? Make sure that the eyes or thereabouts, especially if you're doing a headshot like this, right? I could even probably go a little more, or come in a little bit more on the bottom, right? You also want to watch where you're cropping. So they had originally cropped below the elbow, right? I would generally crop above the elbow, and you want to avoid cropping at the joints, okay? So I'm going to come in a little bit tighter. Don't need so much headspace. Straighten things out. Let's see if we're straight now. That looks pretty good. And just hit enter. Right? So already a big difference. I like the space off to the left because he's sort of facing that way, or leaning his body. His body is facing that way, right? Let's see. I could darken the background a little more with the AI, or I could go into change the sky again, like I did with our minors, and give it something a bit bluer. Let's see what happens if we do this one. So there's a lot of like really nice tones happening in this image in the background. Oh, that's pretty punchy. Let's see. I'm gonna give it a little bit of warmth, darken it a little bit. There we go. Okay, so that sky fits in a little better now, right? Let's just have a look. See the difference? So before, the background's really bright. I use the Portrait AI, the Portrait Bokeh AI. Say that fast 5 times. And the sky replacement to give me something that looks more like this. Right. And I would probably find maybe another sky that's a little better. We could actually even put a sunny sky in here. We could put one that's got some clouds. Let's see what this one looks like. Let's see. Let's try something like that. The other thing is I could put some clouds using the augmented sky as well. Okay, so I could go with the basic sky and then add some clouds. So I'll see how this one looks, but if I'm not happy with it, I'll just undo it. Oh my goodness. Okay, so now the sky has gone way down there. So I'd have to do some repositioning, but I'm just going to undo. So it's guessing. Actually, let me do that again. It's guessing where the horizon is, and because the sky itself has a lot of blue and then the water has blue, it's getting tricked. Okay, I'm going to try this one. Okay, so let's see. Once it places it, now I can position the horizon by clicking this button. So this is new as of the last update 4, right? So if you're using an older version of Luminar AI, so I can find out where it's placed the horizon. It's down here somewhere, right? That looks kind of crazy. So it looks really bad, but it's not as bad as you think, okay? So all we need to do is place the horizon in the right place and get that moving up there. Come on, work with me. There we go. So the horizon's way down there. So that's the problem. See that? Okay, so now we can also tilt the horizon, which was new, right? So we can rotate it. I hope. I should be able to rotate it. It's not letting me rotate. Oh, there it was. There we go. Okay, so I can rotate it now to match the horizon because we corrected that tilt. So that's our horizon position. Okay, I'm gonna do a little brighter. Getting closer, and now this one does have a reflection. Okay. We also need to defocus this one, okay, because the background is really out of focus. You want to really make sure that it matches. Okay, so if you put a sky in that's in focus, it's not going to make sense. Okay. One slider that I wish that they would add actually is saturation on the slot on this one, because I'd love to be able to desaturate that sky a little bit, because it actually looks not too bad, but I would like to desaturate it just a little bit. Great, matching a little better. And again, the idea behind all of this is that I'm creating more blue in the background because his skin tone is warmer. Okay, so when I used to do portraits in the studio, I would often use a blue background. And what they've done here, you know, out on the beach with the ocean looks really great. The only thing that I might complete here is give it a little bit more contrast because it's a little on the flat side. Okay, our sky's looking pretty good now. I would give it a little more contrast, and I could do that with either smart contrast or playing around with the curve. Um, Please link to the curves video, Rob. And I haven't forgotten your question, Linton. I haven't forgotten that one. Like that. Okay, so look at the contrast now that I've added a little bit of black, a little bit of white. So the same thing I was doing in Lightroom where I was doing the black slider and the white slider, I just did that with the curves layer right here. Okay. Okay, now you want to know how to add a catch light. So I'm going to zoom into 50% because I want to see his eyes and I want to see these things in the background. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to add local masking. So this is in Luminar AI, remember, okay? Go to the local masking tools, add basic, okay? And I'm going to crank up the whites or highlights, okay? So I'm going to crank up the highlights so you can see what it's doing, right? I'm going to crank up the exposure. And what I'm going to do is mask it, right? And if you choose paint, as opposed to erase, as soon as you click, let me just turn off my green cursor. As soon as you click on the image, it's going to mask everything except that spot. So I'm going to make it real small. I'm going to come closer to his eyes. Okay. You can see that the spot that I have is about the size of the, can you see the little white spot in his eyes? We'll see it in a moment when it kind of comes into focus here. Now, I'm working on raw files as well. So if you are finding that your computer is working a little slow, that's why. Make sure that you have really good specs for your computer. Okay. So I'm just going to hit paint right here and see what that did. Paint right there. Right. Now the highlights actually should be on this side of his eye. I'm going to undo that. I'm going to completely undo that because I put the highlight on the wrong side. Okay. He's got a natural highlight on that side, but the light on his face is coming from this side. Okay. You see that? So I messed that part up. All right, let's try that again. Oops. Apparently, let's just clear the mask because I messed that up. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to paint now. So the mask is clear. I'm going to paint with my tiny little brush. And I'm just going to put a highlight over here. Okay? Because I want the catch light or the highlight to be on the same side as the light direction. Okay? Let's do it again, maybe a little smaller. Okay. And if I wanted to get rid of the one on the other side, I could get rid of it with the erase tool. Right? So can you see what that's doing? It's just making those little catch lights. Okay, so you can do those kinds of things with the local adjustment tool, the local masking, and paint in whatever you want to paint in. Right? I'm going to go back over here. All right, how are we going? Graduated filter. So Rob has shared a few links to different things. Ali wanted to know, do I have a tutorial that explains the lines of the gradient? Did you mean on the graduated filter or for the sky replacement tool? Because the one that I was just doing was the sky replacement tool in Luminar. So if you could give her the link to the sky replacement video, please, because after update 4, that's a new thing. So instead of having sliders to move the horizon level up and down, you now have the tool. Okay, so it comes out with a dot and 3 lines. The middle line is where sort of the center point, and how far apart the outer lines are is how big the fade is. Okay, so close together means the sky doesn't fade, right? It just falls off. If you want it fading up into the horizon gradually, use a wider one. And then I had to put my mouse on the side to grab that middle one and to do the to correct the tilts for it. Okay. Okay, so then the last thing I'm going to do here is these little guys in the background are a little bright, right? So I could do some super contrast and lower my highlights. This is a tool that I use a lot because it allows me to target the highlights, the midtones, or the shadows, right? And you can see that it's doing a nice job here, but I don't want it everywhere. I just want it on those bits on the sea. Okay, I could clone them out as well. Okay, so I hope that answers your question, Ali. So it was the sky tool. Okay, so I'm just going to paint in again. Get a softer brush. So I'm using the keyboard shortcuts, and to adjust, you'll notice that the radius slider is going up and down, and that's the square bracket keys, right? If you want to change the softness of the brush, shift square bracket keys, right? So I just want to paint this effect in here. Okay? I don't want it everywhere. So see how that's really nicely taking those highlights down. Okay? Or I could have done another one of those adjustment brush layers. So there's a few different ways that you can affect just these areas. Okay? I could also use the dodge and burn tool here. All right, so what do we think? Okay, so the original doesn't have a lot of color, right? I've added quite a bit of color. I'm not super happy with that sky. I would probably play around a little bit more and find a better sky, but in the essence of time, it's okay. For me, it's a little bit too blue, so I would go back and find one that's less blue, or go back to the one that we had, which was actually worked quite well, and go with that one, and then just add some clouds. So as a matter of fact, let's do that. I think it was this one, wasn't it? Or was it this one? Let's just see what we get. But we know that the position is right. I'm going to take the brightness down and the warmth down. So undo all the stuff we did for the one with the clouds. Now we're getting closer. Okay, so now it looks like it matches a little better. I'm happier with that. And then if we want something interesting, we could just add a sky, an augmented sky, such as a cloud. Okay, so augmented sky. Oh, it's not going to let me. Interesting. Doesn't want me to place something in the sky. Oh, there we go. So I could add a sky. Let's see. Let's just pick a cloud. Okay, let's pick a cloud. And I definitely know I'm going to want to defocus it and probably place it. Okay, so it did actually defocus it fairly well, but I'll just give it a little more defocus. And I don't want it right behind his head. I'm going to move it. That's my alarm ring on my phone right now, is the cartoon. Like to move it, move it. Okay, so I can move this cloud. I can also flip it if I want to make it go the other direction. Let's make it a little smaller. Right, getting closer. I just don't want it coming out of his head. Right? But you'll notice that as I move it around, the cloud doesn't go on top of his head. It knows that he's there and it puts it behind him. Right. So that's that AI smart technology happening again. Right. It's pretty darn smart, I have to say. Okay. So I'm happy with that. And if you play with the amount slider on this, it actually just sort of makes it less opaque and it'll like make the cloud more wispy looking. Right. Let's see how that is. There we go. Okay, so if I'm happy with that, let's call it done. So I'm going to go back here and just have a look. So what I've done with this image, we can actually, let me change this to a larger thumbnail here. I could copy and paste. The cloud is not in the right place. I can copy and paste the settings from Luminar to another one. Okay, so I can do that by right clicking and choosing adjustments, copy. And then when I go to this one, I can do Command V or the same thing. Adjustments, paste. Right click, adjustments, paste. Okay, now it's going to do the sky replacement and the cloud and all that other stuff. It's going to cut him out with Portrait Bokeh. So it takes a little bit of time to do that, right? But let's see how close it gets without having to do anything. Okay, it may or may not crop. I'm not sure if cropping comes across if I'm copying and pasting, but let's have a look. Right. Let's see. Oh, look at that. Okay, so we've got he's got some catch lights on his neck. Okay, so it looks like he's been bit by a vampire. So we're definitely going to want to turn that off, right? And I think he's got better catch lights on his eyes on this one. So I would do a little bit of tweaking here, but other than the mask around his head and the sky in the background being a little too dark, it's actually not bad, right? Right. So just from one click, keep in mind, again, like I said, it's taking a while because I applied a lot of AI, right? So I'm just going to kind of undo some of these things like the cloud because we don't need a cloud here. And I'm definitely going to adjust the density here. Okay. Let's just go back to 0. And I know we're going to need to straighten the horizon again. So this is a tricky one because he looks like he's up and down, but the horizon is crooked. So when you're doing portraits or anything like this where there's a person, try not to get the horizon coming through their head. Bye, Linton. Thanks for coming. Right. So try not to get the horizon through their head. And let's just see if I can fix this one quickly. I think we've got the Portrait Bokeh happening. We've got the sky AI. We've got the body AI, right? So look at what it's doing on his tummy, right? So that's that abdomen, right? So we could go back here and say, well, we don't really want the body, but it's nice to have a nice, who doesn't like a tummy tuck, right? So we'll have the tummy tuck. And let's just straighten this guy up here. See how that works. So I think if I straighten that horizon, right, we're going to run into trouble of him being crooked. Okay. Let's see what it thinks. Okay, again, I've mentioned this before. I don't think I want to crop in at all. So I'm actually just going to undo that. And I'm just going to try and straighten this horizon, but I'm not sure what that's going to do to him. Let's see. I don't want to lose the bottom of his shirt, and I don't want to lose the bottom of his or top of his head. Okay. I think that's better. I need to play with my mask a little bit because it looks like I'm either blurring the background and I missed the mask here. Right, so I've darkened this too much and made it too blue. So let's just do a little correction. And now you can see that I've gone so far with the depth correction that the bit behind him is too out of focus. I want to have a little bit of the sand in focus. So that's where you change the depth correction. And I'm going to change this so that the edge correction is fixing that problem with his hair. And that should give us a better result. Let's just do that. So I play around with the amount, which is the overall amount of the blur, the depth correction, which is how close it is to him, right? So we don't see his feet, but we do see the sand behind him. So I think it's better with the sand a bit more in focus. And it's still working. There we go. That's better. So there's still some sort of a little halo around him, and I can fix that. I think it's the blur. All right, so I'm just going to zoom in a little bit and do focus at 50% or so, and get a brush that is just about that big. Because what I want to do is just kind of overlap the edge of his hair like this. And I just want to try and focus that bit around his hair. So I just am extending the focus a little bit more around the edges so that I'm trying to get rid of that halo and play with it a little bit. Because it's done a really nice job around his shoulders. It's just the hair, right? Let's see how that's coming. Still thinking about it. But I don't think we need to add catch lights in this particular case. Okay, let's do a little bit more. So I'm trying to get that hair and to get rid of that blur. It's sort of blurring the edge of his hair too much, and it's making that halo, I think. There we go. Better. All right. So quickly copying and pasting from the other image. I did some adjustments because there was a few things that weren't right. You know, he had vampire highlights on his neck, looked like vampire bites, and we needed to adjust the background a little bit. But I mean, honestly, how quickly did we get to here? Oops, my mouse is over here. How quickly did we get from that to that? And he's got more punch. He stands out from the background a lot more, right? He even had a little tummy tuck. See, look at the tummy, right? So I think that's where we're going to leave it for today. Do we have any questions about any of those things? So we covered quite a lot today. We covered different things in Lightroom, cropping, how to decide how to crop an image, whether to go vertical or horizontal, and why. Let's see. I'm trying to look and remember what we covered. We did a black and white conversion that actually looked really good on Dawn's image. We did some portraits, including Trisha's minors and a couple of others that used the Portrait Bokeh and some templates. So covered lots of things today. If there's anything that we missed that we didn't put in the chat, we'll make sure to put in the description below the video. So if you're watching this replay, check the description below. There's links to how to submit your images for next week or for future weeks so that I can consider editing your images and show you how I would approach your images, right? For those of you that show up every single week and watch, thank you so much. We really appreciate you joining us and appreciate your time. I hope that you're learning a lot, and we will see you next week.